In the labyrinth of battlefield reports and sterile statistics, the most visceral truths often emerge not from the polished press releases of the Kremlin, but from the bitter testimonials of those on the other side of the wire. Yuri Kochino, a frontline correspondent and military blogger once rooted in Russia's ultra-nationalist rhetoric, has unexpectedly dropped an informational bombshell that has sent shockwaves through the global military intelligence community. His revelation is more than a mere admission of technical failure, it is a blood-soaked indictment of a military apparatus rotting from within. Kochino has exposed a reality that can only be described as annihilation at the starting line. According to the harrowing data he gathered from the brutal front lines of 2026, a terrifying figure has emerged. Between 80% and 90% of Russian personnel losses do not occur in direct firefights, nor during the storming of enemy trenches, but rather when these soldiers have only just begun their march. Imagine a grim, almost absurdly cruel scenario. A Russian squad receives orders to advance. They carry with them the belief in a fair fight, in glory, and in the ideals manufactured by state media. Yet, out of those 10 young men, 8 or 9 will fall before they ever lay eyes on a single Ukrainian soldier, before they ever have the chance to pull the trigger, and before they even set foot on the line of contact, the place where they were told the battle would begin. They die in burning trucks, in the middle of desolate fields, or on forest trails, erased by an invisible enemy from dozens of miles away. The evolution of the morphology of death on the Ukrainian battlefield over the years serves as a testament to the helplessness of the Russian command. If 2022 and 2023 were defined by massive losses of ostentatious armored columns, by 2024, when armor became steel coffins, too vulnerable to ignore, Russia was forced to downgrade to motorcycles for mobility. By 2025, they regressed further to the most primitive of tactics, breaking troops into small infantry infiltration groups, trudging through forest belts in the hope that being small would help them evade the eyes of death. But entering 2026, all such efforts at adaptation have been rendered futile by the emergence of kill zones, governed by algorithms and artificial intelligence. Putin's soldiers are no longer warriors, they have become ghosts, flickering on a chessboard where the opponent has already foreseen every move. Kochino's assertion that 90% of Russian troops are neutralized while still in the rear does not just highlight Ukraine's technological superiority, it reflects a heartbreaking truth. Russian soldiers are being turned into sacrificial pawns for an obsolete strategy, where human lives are used as a yardstick to measure the range of drones and the precision of enemy artillery. If Yuri Kochino's revelation regarding the 90% casualty rate was a shock to the senses, the reasoning behind it is a terrifying technical revolution. Ukraine has transformed the entire theater of war into a digital slaughterhouse. The key to the catastrophe currently consuming the Russian military lies in two words that strike terror into the heart of any soldier: kill zones. These are no longer passive minefields or static defensive lines, they are an active, multi-layered, and intelligent predatory system, operated by unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, that have evolved to a state of lethal perfection by 2026. To understand the expansion of this Reaper's domain, one must look at the timeline of technological escalation. In the early stages of the conflict, standard FPV, first-person view, drones were limited by a range of 5 to 7 kilometers. During that period, Russian units still had breathing room in the rear to consolidate supplies and mobilize forces. However, moving into 2025 and especially the first half of 2026, Ukraine achieved a quantum leap in engineering. The kill zones that were once narrow strips of land near the front have metastasized into vast plains, thrusting deep into the Russian rear, up to 15 kilometers for standard FPVs. And even more chillingly, over 144 kilometers, 90 miles, for the new generation of mid-range, intercept and strike drones. The danger lies not merely in explosive power, but in absolute omnipresence. Ukraine has established a rotating eye-in-the-sky system, where high-altitude reconnaissance drones operate 24/7. These devices soar far above the visual and auditory range of soldiers on the ground, silently beaming high-resolution imagery back to command centers. In this era, Battlefield privacy is a non-existent luxury. Whether it is a supply truck attempting to sneak through a forest at midnight or a group of soldiers huddling in a temporary camp miles from the front, every movement appears in crystal clarity on the screens of Ukrainian drone operators. The moment a target is locked, the kill zone activates its purge mechanism. Swarms of kamikaze drones are unleashed with a speed and precision that is suffocating. For the Russian soldier, this is a lopsided war of flesh and blood against silicon and circuitry. They are hunted from the very second they step out of their assembly points. They die in their trucks. They die trudging along drainage ditches. And most agonizingly, they die without ever knowing where their killer is located. This explains why Russia's thunderous armored assaults have vanished, replaced by desperate attempts to use motorcycles or small foot patrols, futility disguised as tactics in a vain effort to reduce their thermal and visual signatures. Yet, even these tactical shifts are neutralized by Ukraine's seamless integration of technology and terrain. In areas like the Serebryanki forest, Ukraine has proven that even safe havens, deep in the rear, can become mass grounds. By pairing long-range reconnaissance with precision-guided artillery and elite special forces, Ukraine has crafted the perfect trap. A landmark example in late 2025 saw an entire Russian unit of over 2,000 troops decimated while still 10 kilometers from the line of contact. They hadn't even fully armed themselves for combat. Yet death arrived from above, swift, clinical, and absolute. Ukraine is not merely defending, they are redefining the very concept of a war zone. By extending their reach through drone technology, they have rendered the entirety of occupied territory uninhabitable for Russian forces. When the depth of a kill zone reaches 144 kilometers, it means the entire logistical spine, command hierarchy, and staging areas of the Russian military are perpetually in the crosshairs. War is no longer about who can fire a rifle faster, but who possesses the most efficient search and destroy algorithm. For the Russian army, every meter advance in 2026 is no longer a gain of territory, but a shortened step toward the cemetery. In Ukraine's kill zones, the Reaper never sleeps. However, to blame Ukraine's drone superiority alone would be to see only half of the blood-stained picture. There is an even more harrowing truth. Another lethal virus is gnawing at the Russian military from within, transforming it into a self-destructing entity. This is the moment a Russian soldier realizes that, beyond a sky filled with enemy eye gods, the people standing beside them, those wearing the same uniform and those issuing the orders, are becoming their potential executioners. The Russian soldier's enemy is not merely on the other side of the trenches, the greatest, most ruthless enemy is the one who stares back at them in the mirror every morning. In the landscape of 2026, as the pressure of consecutive failures weighs heavily on the Russian command, brutality has become the only remaining method of personnel management. Desperation is not born solely from the fear of drones, it stems from the total debasement of human value within this military machine. Investigations and reports from the Moscow Times and the BBC have unveiled a chilling shadow, a surging tide of suicides and internal executions. When the chance of death from a drone in front is 90%, and the certainty of death from a commander's pistol behind is 100% if one retreats, the Russian soldier is trapped in a psychological pincer with no escape. Horrific accounts have emerged of soldiers losing their minds before ever reaching the battlefield. In the Moscow region in late 2025, a violent shooting erupted within a barracks when a soldier, unable to endure the psychological strain, opened fire on his comrades before taking his own life. The Russian Ministry of Defense dismissed it as a mishandling of weapons. But in reality, it was the scream of a soul that had shattered before the war even began. Such incidents are no longer isolated, they are the symptoms of a military dying at its spiritual core. These men never set foot in Ukraine, yet they became victims of the war on their own soil. Even more disturbing is the resurrection of blocking units and corpse pits for those who refuse to fight. By early 2026, the term zeroing, internal liquidation, had become a pervasive nightmare. Witnesses described seeing dungeons and mass graves filled with the bodies of dozens of Russian soldiers, men who did not fall to Ukrainian shelling, but were shot by their own commanders for refusing to march into the kill zones. This is a ruthless loop. A commander issues a suicidal order to appease his superiors. The soldiers refuse, knowing certain death awaits, and they are executed as an example to others. In the eyes of the Kremlin, soldiers are no longer defenders of the motherland, they are expendable resources. No different from oil or gas, except they possess blood and the capacity to cry. This rot extends to the most basic equipment. While the world moves into an era of artificial intelligence and hypersonic weapons, Russian soldiers in 2026 are being issued AKMs and AK-74s from the 1960s and 70s, rusty antiques that are poorly maintained and prone to jamming at the moment of life or death. Imagine the despair of the 10% who are lucky enough to survive the drone rain and reach the front, only to find that the weapon in their hands is a useless piece of scrap metal. The shortage of modern hardware has forced Russia to drain the dregs of Cold War reserves, thrusting soldiers into a 21st century war with mid-20th century technology. This combination of brutality and incompetence has led to a silent but massive exodus, the wave of desertion. With over 70,000 cases of desertion recorded by the end of 2025, the Russian military is hemorrhaging manpower in an irreversible way. The Russian soldier is not fleeing due to a lack of courage, but because he realizes he is participating in a game where the only rule is a meaningless death. When the command hierarchy views the lives of subordinates as mere digits on a territorial report, loyalty vanishes, replaced by the raw instinct for survival. The Russian army of 2026 is not just losing on the battlefield against Ukraine, it is disintegrating from the inside, where the brutality of Russian against Russian has become a second front, just as visceral and just as bloody as the first. From the fire-streaked kill zones of the drone wars to the internal dungeons of localized executions, all paths converge into a singular, devastating realization. By 2026, the Kremlin strategy in Ukraine has devolved into an act of strategic suicide on a continental scale. A naked truth now stands before the world. Despite Vladimir Putin's attempts to maintain a veneer of stoicism in televised briefings, the raw data from the battlefield screams of an irreversible catastrophe. When 90% of your manpower perishes before ever touching a trigger, the concepts of victory or liberation become the most bitter ironies in modern military history. The statistics from the spring offensive of 2026 reveal a madness that defies logic. Russia incinerated over 35,000 lives in the span of a single month, enough to fill a mid-sized stadium, only to receive a net gain of zero territory. For the first time in over 2.5 years, the Russian war machine failed to push the front line forward by even a single meter. Conversely, Ukraine, through intelligent defensive posturing and relentless technological integration, has reclaimed land with surgical precision without mortgaging its future in mountains of corpses. This is no longer a conventional war of attrition, it is a collision between a 20th century mindset of mass sacrifice and 21st century precision warfare. The price Russia pays for this arrogance is a bottomless black hole of human potential. Political reports indicate that Russia liquidated its elite corps throughout 2025, enduring an estimated 420,000 casualties just to seize a paltry 0.8% of Ukrainian territory. To put this into perspective, this loss exceeds the entire active duty personnel of the British Army 3 times over. Putin is playing a high-stakes gamble where the chips are the future of the Russian people. Yet the more he bets, the deeper he sinks into demographic debt, with the casualty rate outpacing recruitment for 4 consecutive months. The renewable resource of human lives that the Kremlin once boasted of is finally running dry. Russian youth no longer see glory at the front, they see anonymous graves in the kill zones. This deadlock has begun to fracture the very heart of Russia. Dissent no longer comes from a marginalized political opposition, but from the Kremlin's own heroes, military bloggers and battlefield analysts like Alexander Khodorkovsky and Alexei Sukhonian. They have begun to use terms like renewable resource, with biting sarcasm to describe how Russian commanders expend their men. The reality is undeniable, even if Russia possessed every weapon in the world. They cannot win when their soldiers evaporate like sea foam before they ever lay eyes on the enemy. Yuri Kochino's grim prophecy of a 100-year war is not an exaggeration, but a warning of a nation imprisoned in a death loop from which there is no escape. The outcome of the 2026 spring offensive serves as the final answer to Putin's political calculus. An army that cannot advance, a command that cannot adapt, and a generation of young men dying in hopelessness. This is all that remains of the imperial dream. Russia has fallen into a trap of its own making. It is too large to collapse instantly, yet too rigid to ever truly win. When 90% of soldiers fall before the dawn of the battle, it reflects more than just the failure of a campaign. It signals the end of a military era built on brutality. Ultimately, war is not just about how much land is seized, but who retains enough humanity and intellect to move forward. On the battlefields of Ukraine in 2026, Russia appears to have lost both. The ghosts on the road to the front will haunt Russian history for centuries, serving as the ultimate proof that a strategy built on lies and human sacrifice leads to only one destination: the total collapse of the one who started the game.